28th December 1885. A step to awaken India was taken. An organization to formalize and discuss India's struggle was formed. An idea which would eventually help India win its independence from British tyranny and become a global power in its own right. The Indian National Congress. Founded by Alan Octavian Hume, W.C. Banerjee, Dadabhai Naoroji, M.G. Ranade, Dinshaw Wacha, and many other illustrious individuals. The INC started as a platform to voice Indian public opinion. Between 1885 to 1905, INC passed several resolutions regarding civil rights as well as administrative, constitutional rights and economic emancipation. Growing strength to strength, INC soon became a platform for Indians demanding Swarajya and was led by stalwarts from Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Annie Besant, Gopal Krishna Gokhale to Surendranath Banerjee. It was in 1947 that the Indian National Congress succeeded in its mission to win India her independence and become known the world over for her non-violent struggle to become a democratic, secular and socialist republic of the people, by the people and for the people. In our next episode, we talk about Congress sessions of 1885 to 1894, a time when Congress leaders from across the country would gather to ideate and strategize. Write to us with your ideas and feedback at dharohar@inc.in. In the last episode, we spoke about the formation of the Congress Party and the sacred goal to achieve independence for our great nation. Over the next few years, the Congress Party continued to grow and the desire for independence burnt brighter. In 1885, the first session of the Congress Party was held in Bombay and was presided over by Vyomesh Chandra Banerjee. The first session was attended by 72 delegates representing each province of British India. At this session, it was decided that the Congress would promote nation building and serve as a platform for civic and political dialogue between Indians and the British Raj. In addition, a proposition was made to abolish the Council of India in London. At the same time, the Congress demanded a reduction in military spending along with reforms in the civil services. In 1886, the second session was held in Calcutta under the chairmanship of Dadabhai Naoroji. The session was attended by 434 delegates, almost 6 times more than the first session. During this session, the Congress Party proposed resolutions towards poverty alleviation and thus began the lifelong journey to rid our nation of the cruelty of poverty. It was these proposals that inspired future schemes like Manrega and Food Security Act. In 1887, the Madras session, headed by Badruddin Tayyabji, brought a proposal against the Arms Act. During 1889 Bombay session, the party passed a resolution to give 21-year-olds the right to vote. In 1890, Kadambani Ganguly, the first female graduate, attended the Calcutta Convention. Today, as the nation faces the havoc of Gabbar Singh tax, we must remember it is not the first time. Our nation has faced it before, at the hands of the British. At that time, the Congress passed a resolution against the cruel cotton tax forced upon farmers in its 10th session held in Madras in 1894. By this time, the people of India had full faith in the Congress. The Congress gave the people a platform to raise their voice. This is what the Congress session did. They provided every Indian with the chance to be heard, and as time continued on, their voices grew stronger and louder. Write to us with your ideas and feedback at dharohar@inc.in. The division we see today is not new. Even during the freedom struggle, the British chose to divide India based on religious, sectarian, caste and regional lines, with the sole purpose of retaining power. The Congress knew of Britain's divide and rule policy and understood the importance of maintaining unity amongst the Indian people, as the alternative would jeopardize the freedom struggle. In its 1896 session in Calcutta, under the leadership of Rahmatullah Sayani, the Congress took a historic step in strengthening the people's movement. It was during this session that for the first time Vande Mataram, composed by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, was sung by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, and as a result, a new spirit was infused in the freedom struggle. Vande Mataram which means to worship the mother, became exceedingly popular because at the time the sole aim of all Indians was to win freedom for Bharat Mata. Stunned by the popularity of this song, which became a permanent fixture during rallies, the British government decided to ban it. There will always be tyrants who choose to suppress the voice of the people, whether it was the British then or the ones from today. After 1896, Vande Mataram played at every subsequent Congress session, and the enthusiasm it inspired terrified the British Raj. It was the name of Lala Lajpat Rai's publication. It was the last words of our martyred revolutionaries. The flag that Bhikaji Cama raised in Germany had Vande Mataram inscribed upon it. It was present in Pandit Ram Prasad Bismil's book Kranti Gitanjali. Vande Mataram was everywhere, echoing through the streets of Bharat Mata. It was because of this that in 1937, a committee where Pandit Nehru, Maulana Azad, Subhash Chandra Bose, Rabindranath Tagore and Acharya Dev decided to use Vande Mataram as the national song. During the freedom struggle, the British used Vande Mataram to create religious and sectarian divisions within the Indian polity. Today, similar efforts are being made. But India didn't bow down then and will not bow down now. Jai Hind. During independence period, 85% of India's population were farmers. And just like today, where unfair taxes like GST are being imposed on farmers, the British government also imposed arbitrary taxes to strengthen their control over India. Back then, the Congress stood as the biggest obstacle in the way of the British, and even today, the Congress will stand up to oppressive policies like the land acquisition law, which seeks to take away land from farmers. In the year 1897, farmers from Rajasthan to Maharashtra were agitating against the oppressive tax policies of the British government. It was during the Congress session of the time in Amravati, Maharashtra, under the chairmanship of C. Sankaran Nair, that the decision to boycott the tax was first called for. Through proposals to reduce the land tax and revise the tenancy period, the Congress united farmers across the country with the help of leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Meanwhile, a non-revenue movement was organized in Deccan, Maharashtra, in which members of Tilak's Pune Sarvajanik Sabha and students of Pune called on the landlords not to pay the revenue to the British rule. Congress was fast becoming the voice of farmers, and the nationwide peasant movement of 1897 was causing serious concerns for the British government. From Champaran to Bardoli, farmers stood shoulder to shoulder with the Congress during the freedom struggle. During the freedom struggle, farmers were not given a cut in crop revenue. Today, farmers are not given the right price promised to them for seeds and crops. Just like the British era, the farmers are beaten for daring to raise their voice. From unfair taxes to corruption in crop insurance to profiteering. The situation today is not very different from the times of British tyranny. But just like the farmers had joined Congress to fight tyranny then, they will do it again now. And just like Congress had fought for their rights then, we will do it again now, without retreating or backing down. Jai Hind. Write to us with your ideas and feedback at dharohar@inc.in. The Congress in its session from 1898 to 1903 focused on issues related to labourers, farmers and famine. During the 1898 session, Anand Mohan Bose had said that as a part of the freedom movement, people were starting to think about the millions of poor in the country and for themselves. And for this courage, he was even ready to face the displeasure of the British government. The famine of 1899 killed millions of people and countless cattle due to starvation and disease. But even during such times of crisis, the British government was indifferent towards Indians and their needs. Just like today, the British also made the mistake of choosing to ignore the concerns raised by Congress. In 1901, under the chairmanship of Dinshaw Vacha, the Congress focused on the problems of the poor. The Congress in its resolution emphasized the need for the development of agricultural banks as well as the revival of indigenous art and local manufacturing. At the same time, the Congress also advocated that India's money not be sent outside, and it urged for the development of new industries and extensive employment for Indians in the public sector. In the 1903 session, under the chairmanship of Lal Mohan Ghosh, the Congress raised the issue of lack of revenue and questioned the wastage of millions of rupees and resources due to the presence of British Army in India. Citizens are the most valuable heritage of any country. And it is the sense of standing and fighting for the rights of your country and countrymen that keeps you alive as a heritage. Even during the British era, the Congress stood against the cruelty and atrocities of the British government, the same way it is standing firm against the present government misadventures. The Congress has and will continue to fight for the betterment of India. Jai Hind. Write to us with your ideas and feedback at dharohar@inc.in. The Bengal partition of 1905 remains one of the most scarring moments in India's history, an example of British Empire's divide and rule policy and Viceroy Lord Curzon's divisionary politics. The partition was designed to not only engineer a communal divide in India by way of hatred, but also to diminish Congress's power as it sought to lead the masses in the struggle for independence. Similar tactics that the British used then are being used today. But just as the British were defeated, those in power today will also taste the same defeat. During that time, the entire nation answered Congress's call and stood against this divide and began the Swadeshi and boycott movement. The resolution to boycott British goods was passed on 7th August 1905 during a meeting at the Calcutta Town Hall. The formal proclamation of the Swadeshi movement was made under the leadership of Gopal Krishna Gokhale at the Banaras session of Congress. The focus on Indian goods was not only on hurting the economy of Great Britain, but also promoting indigenous products, strengthening local artisans and manufacturers economically and socially. It led to the establishment of many local textile firms, banks, insurance companies, etc. With leaders like Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, these movements united people of different religions and served as a foundation for the Satyagraha and non-cooperation movements. The additional resolutions on national education and self-government at the 1906 Congress session in Calcutta under the leadership of Dadabhai Naoroji gave further impetus to the movement. It was also during this same session that for the first time Swaraj was stressed upon. And Dadabhai Naoroji proclaimed that we are not seeking any grace, we are only demanding justice. From Swadeshi to Swaraj, the Congress did not compromise its views even after independence and made the country self-sufficient by building lasting institutions. This devotion and struggle for the betterment of India continues even today and will always be at the forefront of the Congress ideology. Jai Hind. By the early 1900s, the demand for Swaraj, which was initiated in the 1906 Calcutta session, was spreading around the country. The Congress, with the support of the public, was leading the movement from the front. By 1907 Surat session, an inherent feature of the Congress party was coming out. The party united people of different ideologies for a common cause, independent India. At the Madras session of 1908, under the presidency of Ras Bihari Ghosh, the Congress passed a resolution to reject the partition of Bengal and keep the Bengali identity intact. It also passed a resolution to appoint Indian soldiers to higher posts in the army. After the famine crisis, the Congress took a tough stand on the ever-increasing inflation, and in the same session, the Congress also raised the matter of free primary education. At the Lahore session of 1909, under the chairmanship of Madan Mohan Malviya, the Congress defeated another divisive ploy of the British by rejecting the formation of separate electorates on the basis of religion. The British government was trying everything possible to divide the country. But just like today, the Congress even then kept the nation united. In the 1909 session, Bhupendranath Bose and Surendranath Banerjee were sent to England to spread the word amidst the global community on Britain's divisive agenda. Indian workers were tortured in African countries. In the Allahabad session of 1910, the Congress opposed this indentured system of the British and strongly opposed sending Indian workers to Africa. The Congress succeeded in protecting Indian interests and thus gained the trust of the Indian people. India's interests, ideas, objectives and goals have always been of paramount importance to the Congress, And the same continues even today. Look at the RTE itself. Even though it came in 2009, its foundation was laid in the 1908 session almost 100 years ago. The Congress will never stop working for the interest of Indians, no matter what the conditions may be. Jai Hind. The year 1911 is an unforgettable part of Indian history for two reasons. The Congress was not only opposing the Bengal partition in its sessions, but had also taken to the streets in protest. Eventually, the colonial powers had to bend and the Bengal partition was repealed in 1911. The battle for Bengal's unity was won. The British policy of divide and rule was defeated by the country and the Congress. A strong message reverberated through the nation. Our strength lies in our unity, and united we can defeat all anti-India forces. It was in 1911 itself that Congress's Calcutta session was held under the leadership of Bishan Narayan Dhar, and it was in this session that Jana Gan Man, written by the son of Bengal, the great poet Rabindranath Tagore, was sung for the very first time. And since that very first recital, Jana Gan Man has become a symbol for patriotism for Indians, and for this reason, it was selected to be the national anthem of India in 1950. Jana Gan Man infused the spirit of patriotism in the struggle for freedom. After Vande Mataram, it was this poem that filled the hearts of all of those fighting for sovereignty. Jana Gan Man had taken over people's minds and thoughts. And it was for this reason that for Mahatma Gandhi, Jana Gan Man had cemented its place in our nation's life. While as per Nehruji, the first PM of independent India, it was a great national anthem. Hence 1911 gave two major messages. First, once united, India can defeat any oppressive power, and that Indians had stood with the Congress to courageously fight the forces standing against our country. Second, with Jana Gan Man, patriotism and nationalism reached new heights across India. Today, India has been independent for several decades, and we must understand that our ancestors struggled hard and made great sacrifices to keep our country united. We must not let their sacrifices go in vain. We must stand united and defeat all enemies, within and outside India, who seek to undermine our hard-earned freedom. Jai Hind. By helping to reunite Bengal and giving a voice to Indian people, the Congress party gave new direction to the freedom movement. Almost every major freedom fighter of the country joined the Congress to raise their voice for an independent India. And these strong and important steps concluded the Bankipur session of 1912. And it was during this session that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru participated for the first time as a delegate. The Karachi session of 1913 proved to be very important in terms of harmony and unity in India. As a result of the attempt to partition Bengal, Indians realized that they had a common enemy, the British imperialists. All communities realized they had to unite as British bullets would not spare anyone on the basis of religion. In the 1913 session, a resolution for communal harmony was passed so that the divisive agenda of the British could not succeed. In the 1914 Madras session, 866 delegates participated. The influence of not just the freedom movement, but also the Congress was growing stronger. The entire nation was coming together to fight for independence. It was a direct result of the strength of the people and the Congress that even the governor of Madras participated in this session. The Bombay session of 1915, under the chairmanship of S.P. Sinha, proved to be very important in the freedom struggle. In this session, the constitution of the Congress was changed and the strength of the Congress was doubled. The participating members increased to 2,259, and this gave impetus to the independence movement. During the freedom movement, the strength of the Congress became the strength of the people and the country. Even the British understood that the growing strength of the Congress would threaten and weaken their rule over India. Soon enough, the very foundation of British rule would be completely rattled with the arrival of India's hero of the independence struggle. The future of the country was about to change. Jai Hind. Write to us with your ideas and feedback at dharohar@inc.in. Gandhi's arrival to India, while successful, was not without its struggles. And those struggles began while fighting for Indian interests in Africa. Because Gandhi is not made in a day. To become Gandhi, one needs tenacity, meditation, struggle, and sacrifice. In 1893, Gandhiji went to Africa to practice law on a one-year contract and soon became the voice of Indian nationalism across the world. Gandhiji, who had first witnessed racism of apartheid while traveling in a first-class train, made a decision to fight for his rights as an Indian. The battle that started with personal humiliation soon became the voice of Indian rights in Africa. In 1894, he established the Natal Indian Congress to fight discrimination against Indians in South Africa. In 1906, an act by the Transvaal government put the citizenship and identity of Gandhiji and all Asians under jeopardy. Gandhiji strongly opposed this act and thus began his first satyagraha in South Africa on 11 September 1906. On 10th January 1908, Gandhiji was sent to jail. Once released, he decided to burn his papers as an act of protest. Soon enough, the entire Asian community stood behind Gandhiji. On 7th October, Gandhiji was once again put behind bars. Finally, he made the decision to travel to England and unite the entire Indian community. On his return from England to Africa in 1914, his struggles paid off. Not only was the racist citizenship law withdrawn, all Indians were released from jail. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's journey from Mahatma to the father of the nation has countless struggles. In 1994, Africa named Gandhiji a national hero. Nelson Mandela himself appreciated Gandhiji's contribution in the fight against apartheid. The tremendous role Gandhiji would play in India was only just beginning. Jai Hind. Write to us with your ideas and feedback at dharohar@inc.in. The wave of Swaraj that started with Congress's session of 1906 had spread across the country by 1916. And with the advent of the Home Rule League in 1916, there emerged a nationalist and inspirational Congress leader, Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. A true heavyweight, he refused to cower before British tyranny and proudly stated, "Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it." In 1916, both Lokmanya Tilakji and Annie Besant established Home Rule Leagues, and this year is therefore remembered as an important step in the direction towards Home Rule. The Home Rule movement from 1916 also infused an aggressiveness in the Indian freedom struggle that had not come until then. However, while the movement may have been aggressive in nature, it did not believe in the use of weapons or violence. For Lokmanya Tilak's movement too was rooted in non-violence. He made small groups to propagate Home Rule across India and to educate people about Swaraj. The growing popularity of Lokmanya Tilakji filled the British with trepidation. As the ultimate aim of the Home Rule League was achieving Swaraj, just like that of Congress, it was natural that the Home Rule League merged into Congress and joined it on the path to winning freedom for India as Congress's strength and influence grew in the Indian subcontinent. However, even before the merger, Gandhiji had served as the president of the Indian Home Rule League. The Home Rule movement gave a clear message to the British that if Indians decided to come together, they could achieve anything. Even today, we must take inspiration from Lokmanya Tilak's nationalism, where nation takes precedence, where the progress and development of our countrymen, their brotherhood and happiness always comes first. Congress emerged as the flag bearer of this same brand of nationalism, from where India's dreams of being independent could be realized. Jai Hind. 9th January 1915, Mahatma Gandhi arrived in India. At that time, India was facing several difficulties. So, to get a better understanding of the issues the nation faced, Gandhiji took the advice of his guru, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and set out on a journey across the country. His first stop on this journey was in the Champaran district of Bihar, where the British Empire was forcing the farmers to cultivate indigo. This cultivation of indigo was not only destroying the farmers' fertile land, but also their futures. Mahatma Gandhi came as a ray of hope for these farmers. To help them overcome their plight, Gandhiji started India's first civil disobedience movement, which later came to be known as the Champaran Satyagraha. Gandhiji united the people of Champaran by forming a team of competent lawyers against the dictatorial decree of the British and promoted self-reliance, education and financial strength. Soon the Champaran Satyagraha gained strength and acceptance amongst the people. While the British government was adopting every tactic to fight Gandhiji, what they didn't understand was that no amount of shackles would suppress the power of Satya and Ahimsa. Ultimately, Mahatma Gandhi succeeded in his first satyagraha in India, and the British government had to revoke their order of indigo cultivation. The success of Gandhiji's first satyagraha on Indian soil has a lot to do with the identity and contribution of Bihar. A contribution so significant, it is difficult to put in words. In the next episode, we will discuss the success of the Champaran Satyagraha, which in large part was due to both Bapu's and Bihar's solidarity, struggle, sacrifice and unity. The Champaran Satyagraha of 1917 gave a new direction to the freedom movement throughout India. The movement arose because of the 3 Katya practices, which mandated cultivating 3 kattha indigo per bigha as per government orders, but this was destroying the farmers of Champaran. At the same time, the production of artificial indigo in Germany made matters worse for the farmers of Bihar. And on top of that, the tax burden on the farmers kept on increasing. The farmers who were already suffering from financial crisis were forced into poverty and abysmal living conditions. They were in desperate need of leadership and direction. In the 1916 Congress session, Pandit Rajkumar Shukla called upon Mahatma Gandhi to help the farmers of Champaran. However, as soon as Gandhiji reached Champaran, the British government imposed Section 144, but Gandhiji, who had never been afraid of the British, refused to back down. And eventually, the government had to withdraw the order. After this, Gandhiji went from village to village to meet the suffering peasants and give them a movement to unite behind. Leaders from across the board like Rajendra Prasad ji, Anugrah Narayan Sinha ji, J.V. Kriplani ji joined and helped strengthen Bapu's movement in Bihar. After this, an inquiry committee was formed and Gandhiji was included in it. Soon after, the British government was forced to bend to Bapu's satyagraha and tenacity of Bihar. On 4th March 1918, the Champaran Agriculture Act was passed and the 3 Katya practice was abolished. And hence on Bihar's soil, Bapu's first satyagraha came to a successful end. The Champaran Satyagraha is the story of Bihar showing our nation an alternative path during difficult times. Because in spite of the destruction of countless floods, the horrors of encephalitis, the desperate cries of migrant workers, today, Bihar stands proud and ready to welcome a new dawn. This courage of Bihar inspired Bapu. Today, this courage of Bihar is giving hope to the entire nation. The victory of the Champaran Satyagraha gave our nation the first glimpses of this great freedom fighter. It also spelled out the trouble the British government was going to now face. Because 2 great personalities were about to join and strengthen Gandhiji's journey. Jai Hind. After succeeding in Champaran, Gandhiji's next stop was his birthplace Gujarat, where a struggle between mill workers and mill owners was taking place in Ahmedabad, which was famous for cotton textile. In 1917 Ahmedabad, there was an outbreak of the plague epidemic, and because of this, mill workers were given bonuses. However, by 1918 the mill owners announced the bonuses were being discontinued. On one hand, the mill workers were struggling for livelihoods and suffering through the epidemic, and on the other hand, the British were taking dictatorial decisions. So the workers began protesting. The mill workers demanded that they be given 50% allowance. But the dictatorial mill owners were not ready to listen. Gandhiji advised the mill workers to go on a peaceful non-violent strike and demand 35% dearness allowance. But the mill workers were adamant they wanted 50%. In response, the mill owners proposed a 20% allowance and closed the doors of the mill for everyone else. The workers did not even have money to eat, so Gandhiji, in order to feel the pain of the workers and give strength to their voice, decided to fast alongside them. This was Gandhiji's first hunger strike in India. Even the strongest, most authoritarian powers crumble before the might of the people when they choose to come together, and this is exactly what was happening in Ahmedabad. Finally, the mill owners gave in and announced a 35% allowance to the labourers. The 25-day agitation ended with a victory, making it Gandhiji's second successful movement in India. The dictatorial mindset of turning disasters into an opportunity for exploitation has existed for many decades. But eventually, every authoritarian rule will succumb to the unwavering and steadfast resolve of people like Mahatma Gandhi. But the story doesn't end here. There's much more to come, and the Iron Man of India is yet to join Gandhiji's journey. The story of a successful barrister Vallabhbhai Patel becoming Sardar Patel is woven by the threads of dedication, firmness and strong determination. It wasn't easy to become known as Sardar Patel. For this, it was necessary for him to give up his promising legal career. Vallabhbhai Patel returned to India from England in 1913 after completing his legal studies and became the most famous barrister of Gujarat. Vallabhbhai Patel gave up his lucrative legal career in 1917 due to the ongoing plague epidemic and took up the responsibility of being a member of the Ahmedabad Municipal Board, along with the chairmanship of its Cleanliness Committee. During the epidemic, he himself was on the streets of Ahmedabad, helping the people by minutely observing the cleaning of drainage systems and the medicinal spray. Despite the fact that Vallabhbhai Patel himself had been a victim of the plague, his unwavering responsibility towards his work enabled him to share the pain of the common people. The 10th February 1951 edition of Harijan Patrika has an excerpt written by Ganesh Vasudev Malvankar, where he says Patel's eyes said, "I have accepted the responsibility of chairmanship of the Cleanliness Committee. If I leave the post now, it will be a betrayal of the people. How can I leave my fellow cleaning staff during the ongoing plague just for the sake of my own safety?" At the same time, the popularity of Gandhiji was at its peak due to the immense success of the Champaran Satyagraha. Gandhiji had been elected the president of Gujarat Sabha and had requested Sardar Patel to join active politics by becoming a secretary of the Gujarat Sabha. Later, Sardar Patel became the first president of the Gujarat Congress in 1920. The plague epidemic gave the nation a small glimpse of the leadership of Sardar Patel. He was yet to achieve many milestones. The foundation of the British Empire was yet to be shaken by the steely resolve of Sardar Patel. Jai Hind. The flame of Satyagraha lit by Mahatma Gandhi had reached Kheda after crossing Champaran, and here the torch was held by none other than Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. In 1917-18, the Bombay Presidency increased the farm taxes by 23%. This was the time when Kheda division of Gujarat was facing calamities like famine, cholera and plague. This severely crushed the livelihood sources of the farmers and therefore they demanded relief and tax recoveries. Mahatma Gandhi and Sardar Patel met the collector of Nadiad on 11th March 1918. But their request fell on deaf ears of the British rulers. On 22nd March, Gandhiji invoked farmers to resort to Satyagraha and not pay any taxes if their farmlands had produced less than 1/4 of the crop. Meanwhile, Sardar Patel went from village to village getting pledge letters signed from the farmers declaring that they would rather prefer seizure of their farmlands than called liars at the cost of their self-respect. The British government started to seize the cattle and other valuable tools of the farmers in an attempt to break their spirit of fighting peacefully. But the farmers of Kheda didn't shift an inch from the pledge taken by their Sardar. Meanwhile, Gandhiji asked the farmers to harvest the crop from their seized farmlands. Farmers were arrested and cases were registered against them while being tortured, but the farmers of Kheda were not ready to bow in front of the atrocities. The Kheda Satyagraha, under the guidance of Mahatma Gandhi and leadership of Sardar Patel, gave sleepless nights to the British rulers. In the end, on 27 June, the British rulers had to relent. They not only postponed the tax recovery for 2 years, but also returned the seized lands. The Congress stood with the farmers of the country when the then British rulers acted against their interests. The situation is no different today. The dictatorship in policy still persists. But the unity of farmers far outweighs the dictatorship of the present government, and this is the real heritage of the country. Saving this precious heritage is our collective responsibility. Jai Hind. It was the British who started the practice of introducing black laws. Unfortunately, even today our nation faces a similar fate at the hands of other rulers. But our country has never bowed down to any such black laws. Indians have always fought long and fierce battles against injustice. The year was 1919. The British government was growing increasingly nervous by the revolutionary activities and strengthening freedom movement in the country. In order to weaken the resolve of freedom fighters, the British introduced the Rowlatt Act. This act meant the British government could imprison any Indian without being prosecuted. The right to appeal in court was also abolished. Through this law, the British could crush the freedom of the press in India. This black law's sole intention was to crush the freedom movement in India. However, it was impossible to scare away those fighting for freedom. Nationwide strikes, processions and demonstrations began in protest against this black law. Congress leader Madan Mohan Malviya resigned from the membership of Central Administrator. Gandhiji organized a Satyagraha Sabha in Mumbai and called for a nationwide strike. Anger against this black law was at its peak all over the country. Nothing the British could do would break the fighting spirit and desire of Indian freedom fighters. On 9th April 1919, the British government arrested Saifuddin Kichluji and Dr. Satyapal Ji without any reason. On April 10th, thousands of people took to the streets to protest against this arrest. Martial law was imposed in Punjab and General Dyer was put in command. The same Dyer who would carry out the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. It is difficult to describe that cruelty in words, but in the next episode, we will try to illustrate the mentality behind this massacre and the struggle to destroy the black law. April 1919 marks one of the darkest days in our independence struggle and the cruelty of the British rule. On 9th April, British rulers and General Dyer were deeply distressed by the march carried out on the occasion of Ram Navami to express Hindu-Muslim unity. Their distress led to the imprisonment of Mahatma Gandhi as he tried to enter Punjab, and the imprisonment of Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal under the Rowlatt Act. As a result of all this injustice, on 10th April, thousands of people took to the streets to march in protest. Many lives were lost that day due to police firing. But in the face of Bharat Mata's freedom, the question of life and death seemed meaningless.
England!
On 13th April, a peaceful meeting was organized at Jallianwala Bagh against the Rowlatt Act and the arrests. Thousands had gathered and the meeting was proceeding peacefully. Out of nowhere, General Dyer suddenly surrounded Jallianwala Bagh with his armed men. And with a single command of fire, hundreds of bullets pierced the bodies of women, men and children present at this once peaceful meeting. There was commotion everywhere, and within minutes, the well in the Jallianwala Bagh was filled with dead bodies. The entire ground was covered in blood from the bodies that lay strewn across the Bagh, riddled with bullets. This was an incredibly cruel act against humanity by the British rulers. Soon enough, the entire nation erupted in outrage and demonstrations led by the Congress Party against the inhumane acts of General Dyer. The British were struggling to withstand the force. As a result, the Draconian Rowlatt Act was repealed in 1922. The clear message from this painful period in our history is that no matter how powerful the dictator, when India stands together, no power can defeat it. We have to always remember that our ancestors sacrificed their lives irrespective of their caste and religion, with the sole aim of expelling the British out of India. We cannot let the sacrifices of our ancestors go in vain. It is only through unity that we can defend and protect our independence. Jai Hind. The Congress session from 1915 to 1919 played a pivotal role in creating the background of a major movement through Hindu-Muslim unity in the country. Exactly 100 years ago, just like today, there was a grim situation in the country. Inflation was at its peak. Citizens were burdened with needless taxes, the epidemic was wreaking havoc and killing thousands of people. At the same time, the arrogant British government was using tactics like Rowlatt Act to suppress the voice of the country. Right to vote was restricted under the guise of reforms like the 1919 Montagu-Chelmsford. The powers of the provinces were oppressed and curtailed. Overall, the underlying aim of the British rulers was to exploit the masses. Meanwhile, in February 1920, Gandhiji, while condemning the British atrocities in Punjab, warned the British government to apologize for the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, failing which non-cooperation movement would start. The non-cooperation movement was set to commence on 31st August 1920, but unfortunately, on 1st August, Bal Gangadhar Tilak passed away. As a result, a special session of the Congress was convened in Calcutta in September 1920. In this session, it was agreed upon to run a non-cooperation program until the establishment of Swaraj. In this special session of Congress, a call to boycott foreign goods, government educational institutions, and legislative councils and courts was made, and the use of khadi and spinning wheel was encouraged. An agreement was also made to disown government titles, exit from government services, stop remittance of taxes, and boycott government festivals. Along with this, encouraging Hindu-Muslim unity, eradicating untouchability, and non-violence were kept as paramount. Many believe that the 1920 Congress session proved to be the most momentous step in the journey of the non-cooperation movement. The impact of the non-cooperation movement was about to shake the British out of their slumber, even though it had only just begun, and its true form had not yet arrived. The unifying effect of non-cooperation movement. The Calcutta resolution of the special session of the Congress in September 1920 had sent waves across the country. It was from this Congress session that the call to boycott foreign goods began. All over the country, people were setting fire to foreign clothes and products. Gandhiji decided to return the Kesare-Hind medal and instead begin a tour of the whole nation. Hunger and exhaustion didn't stop him. He traveled long distances on foot, reaching some of the most remote places. He met with the most deprived persons of the society by addressing hundreds of public meetings throughout the country. Gandhiji's call had a resounding effect on thousands of students in the country, who dropped out of schools and colleges run by the British rulers and enrolled in national educational institutions. The boycott policy given by Congress was spreading like wildfire in the country. Meanwhile, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose became the principal of National College, Calcutta. Eminent educational institutions like Kashi Vidyapeeth, Jamia Millia, and Gujarat Vidyapeeth also contributed to the non-cooperation movement. The call for boycott led eminent lawyers like Motilal Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, Rajendra Prasad, C.R. Das, C. Rajgopalachari, Saifuddin Kichlu, and Asaf Ali to give up their lucrative careers and take up the cause of the non-cooperation movement. At the same time, donations were flooding into the Tilak Swaraj Fund, exceeding all expectations. The farmers were on the streets, the students had dropped out of schools and colleges, the women had even contributed their ornaments to the Tilak Fund. Hindu-Muslim unity was at its peak. The middle class had left their jobs and the traders cooperated in the economic boycott. Public participation against the British dictatorship was a clear sign of the end of British rule. We should never forget our legacy. Our legacy is based on sacrifice and unity, which has to be strengthened in every situation. The non-cooperation movement was the first pan-India movement of the Indian freedom struggle. Indians from all walks of life were impacted by it. Children, elderly, men, women, farmers, traders, shopkeepers, lawyers, students, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christians, all participated. Today, when we look back, it is easy to understand how the non-cooperation movement gave momentum to the independence movement. Non-violence calls for boycott and non-cooperation were the main tools of this pan-Indian movement. It may be hard to imagine, but this movement spread throughout the country in an age when there was no Facebook, WhatsApp, no mails, no text messages, and even no phone calls. The strategy and leadership of Mahatma Gandhi during the non-cooperation movement took the Indian freedom struggle to new horizons. This movement not only made Indians fearless but also gave them a new belief in themselves. The non-cooperation movement created a new wave of patriotism in the country and put the idea of Swadeshi at the forefront. It was this movement that inspired Indians to quit their jobs and give up their foreign clothes. It taught Indians the importance of making sacrifices to achieve their ultimate goal of independence. Bapu led by example when he gave up regular clothing in favor of a loin cloth or langoti. Deeper study of the non-cooperation movement tells us that it demolished two misconceptions. First, that the British rule was in India's interest, and second, that the sun will never set on the British Empire. The boycott movement demolished the first misconception, while Satyagraha destroyed the second. Now India was ready to wake up to a new dawn of freedom, and the non-cooperation movement gave India the foundation to do so. Our forefathers endured a great deal of pain for independence, from jail to torture, and even sacrificing their lives. They gave up a lot. Whether it was the inspiring struggle of the non-cooperation movement or the dreams that arose from independence, this is the legacy of our forefathers. We must defend every attack on our legacy by staying united, and we must ensure our legacy is treasured. The non-cooperation movement brought the ego of the British Empire to its knees. There were two Congress-led sessions, 1920 Calcutta Special Session and another session of 1920 in Nagpur, both of which played pivotal roles in solidifying the struggle and resolve of citizens behind the national movement. In 1920, Congress sessions in Calcutta under the chairmanship of Lala Lajpat Rai was an important moment, as it both paid tribute to the late Bal Gangadhar Tilak and was the moment where Gandhiji proposed the non-cooperation movement. Gandhiji's proposal and policy of non-violent non-cooperation was unanimously accepted. In this special session, a resolution was passed to boycott foreign goods, resign and return official titles, boycott British government programs and educational institutions, and boycott the courts. All proposals were accepted unanimously. It was also in this session that the Congress proposed the idea of Swadesh on a large scale, which later became a huge challenge for the British government. During this session, members of the Congress party also expressed their disappointment and disagreement with the Hunter Committee, which was constituted to examine the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. While criticizing the growing atrocities in Punjab, the Congress also strongly condemned the apathetic attitude of the British towards these horrors. In December 1920, the Nagpur session of the Congress was held under the chairmanship of C. Vijay Raghava Charyarji. In this session, along with the continuation of the non-cooperation movement, the Tilak Swaraj Fund was established to help with the economic crisis, in which Indians contributed far beyond expectations. In this session, the goal for Swaraj over self-governance was decided upon. Not only this, Along with the formation of the present-day CWC or the Congress Working Committee, smaller Congress committees were extended to the town and village level. The struggle and sacrifice of our ancestors was integral to the success of non-cooperation movement because they had decided that they were ready for any situation to befall them in order to get rid of the tyrannical British rule. Today we must incorporate the same values in order to keep the legacy of our ancestors alive. Jai Hind. The year was 1923 when the struggle for independence reached a crescendo after the non-cooperation movement. A number of people had been arrested during the flag satyagraha in Nagpur. Amongst them were members of the Hubli Seva Mandal founded by N.S. Hardikar. The British government tried to break them, to persuade them and to frighten them, but their efforts proved to be futile against their resolve. It was during this time and while imprisoned that N.S. Hardikar envisioned the formation of Seva Dal, an organization that would train Congress workers and instill in them a strong sense of military discipline and passion to fight British rule. As soon as he was released from jail, Hardikar ji went to Allahabad and met Pandit Nehru to discuss the establishment of a combative organization on the path of truth and non-violence. In 1923, Sarojini Naidu proposed the formation of the Hindustan Seva Dal. Pandit Nehru was appointed as its first president, and later this very organization came to be known as the Congress Seva Dal. After the formation of the Seva Dal, the organization was entrusted with the responsibilities of cleanliness and security in the 1924 Belgaum session. This impressed Gandhiji and he expressly stated that the Congress session would not have been successful without Hardikar ji and Seva Dal. The influence of the Congress Seva Dal on the freedom movement can be gauged from the fact that the British rule banned it in 1932, fearing the revolutionary activities and popularity of the Seva Dal. The Seva Dal has always been an extremely popular and integral organization and has been called by both Pandit Nehru and Rahul Gandhi as the true soldiers of Congress. The importance of the Seva Dal can be measured by the fact that along with Nehruji, many notable Indians like the first president of the country, Rajendra Prasad ji, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Rajguru, etc. were all members of the organization. Congress Seva Dal has always been the backbone of the Indian society and the strength of the Congress party. The strength of Congress Seva Dal is the strength of the nation because Seva Dal's ideology has always put the nation first, not any religion, community, caste or class. The country needs this legacy today. Jai Hind. The Congress sessions held during the freedom struggle were not merely political events but laid the foundation of the freedom movement itself. These Congress sessions maintained the unity of the country and also ensured the participation of the masses in the large movements during the freedom struggle. It was these Congress sessions that gave Indians a platform to raise their voice against British rule. In 1921, Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das was chosen as the president for the Ahmedabad Congress session. But since he was in jail, Hakim Ajmal Khan led the session. During this session, the resolve to strengthen the policy of non-cooperation along with resolutions for practicing individual civil disobedience and appointing Mahatma Gandhi as the sole executive of the Congress were passed. The Gaya Congress session of 1922 under the leadership of Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das continued with the policy of boycott and passed a resolution to encourage labour unions in the country. The session of 1923 under the leadership of Maulana Azad announced the setting up of All India Khadi Board and passed resolutions that encouraged the production and use of khadi along with boycotting of foreign clothes. A committee for civil disobedience movement was also formed during this session. Apart from this, a constitution amendment committee involving Pandit Nehru and Netaji was formed. The Congress sessions played a big part in establishing the party's ideology and upholding the rights of people to raise their voice against injustice. Congress never suppressed the voice of the labourers but in fact added strength to it. It gave them basic rights and introduced labour reform laws. Congress never used khadi in political rhetoric but implemented it as the core idea to unite the country and to encourage Swadeshi. Congress has always remained committed towards India's unity, which also was in effect the guiding force behind India's independence struggle. It is the unity and integrity of the country which has always acted as a wall against anti-national forces. Today, attempts are being made to demolish this wall. It is our collective responsibility to thwart this attempt and defeat anti-national forces by remaining united. Jai Hind. The momentum provided to the freedom movement by the Congress sessions continued till well past 1923. The 1924 Belgaum session was presided over by Mahatma Gandhi, and it was during this session that the resolution to achieve political independence through non-violence and non-cooperation was adopted. The 1925 Kanpur session was historic in the sense that it was presided over by Srimati Sarojini Naidu. For Congress, women's empowerment has never been mere lip service, but concrete action that creates change in society. In 1926, the Guwahati session chaired by S. Srinivas Iyengar passed a resolution for Hindu-Muslim unity and reiterated the party's resolve towards Atmanirbharta. The Madras Congress session of 1927, under the leadership of M. A. Ansari, adopted two very important resolutions: the boycott of the Simon Commission and a resolve for Purn Swaraj or complete independence. This session also passed a resolution against the use of Indian soldiers in China, Iran and Mesopotamia. Today, when state-sponsored hatred is at its peak and our society is more polarized than ever before, it is even more important to understand the reasons Bapu chose non-violence as the path to independence. Because India does not have a propensity for violence, it is our collective responsibility to ensure we do not allow basic nature of our nation to change. The various resolutions passed during the Congress sessions not only illuminated the path for common people, but also made it clear to the British government that India would no longer stand its tyranny and oppression. Standing against oppression is in India's DNA, and no matter which egoistic power tries to suppress that, they will be defeated. Attempts to divide the nation using British strategy are still being made. So it is of paramount importance that Indians ensure they do not let any power try to divide through manipulation of fear and emotions. Our freedom is very precious, and all of us have to collectively protect it. Jai Hind. Shri Rahul Gandhi believes that farmers are the backbone of the nation, and if farmers are strong, it essentially means that the nation is strong. Equally true is the fact that no mature government or leader would ever think of weakening our farmers or committing atrocities against them. However, egoistic and autocratic governments are least bothered with these concerns. They pass black farm laws to undermine the farmers, burden them by levying taxes, attach their farmlands and imprison them for speaking out. The British rulers were doing exactly this in Bardoli of Gujarat in 1928. In 1925, Bardoli was struggling with floods and famine simultaneously. The farmers were under severe economic stress. The Bombay Presidency took the inhumane decision of increasing the tax rates from 22% to 30%. When the government officials ignored the concerns of the farmers decided to oppose the rise in taxes by holding a satyagraha. In a large meeting organized in Bardoli, it was decided that the farmers would not pay the increased tax under any circumstances. They would practice non-cooperation and the agitation would be led by Vallabhbhai Patel. After the success of the Kheda Satyagraha, the farmers strongly believed in the leadership of Vallabhbhai Patel. Patelji apprised the British government of the precarious situation of the farmers, but the autocratic rulers refused to listen and relax the taxation. Instead, the British officials began taking hold of the farmers' land and animals. The farmers kept their faith in Vallabhbhai Patel and refused to back down to the British. The whole country celebrated Bardoli Day on the appeal of Gandhiji and warned the British rulers in clear words that if the tax on farmers of Bardoli was not relaxed, then the whole country will start agitating by refusing to pay taxes. Bardoli witnessed an incredible movement to save India's true legacy, the farmers, to resist atrocities and show unity. The British government was concerned with the solidarity of the peasants, and their problems were only going to increase, because by the end of the Bardoli Satyagraha, the Indian freedom movement would see the rise of Sardar on the horizon. Jai Hind. After the British government ruthlessly increased the taxes in Bardoli, Gujarat, the farmers' strong resolve to fight against the injustice shook the British Empire to its core. It is imperative for every Indian to understand the importance and success of the Bardoli Satyagraha, so that when the Annadatas of our country are attacked, we do not get divided into political, religious, regional, or caste lines. At first glance, Bardoli seems to be only a farmers' satyagraha, but Bardoli did much more than just uniting farmers. It also set an example for Hindu-Muslim unity. In fact, during this movement, farmers recited parts of Ramayana and Quran and took oaths in the name of God. Gandhiji's guidance, Vallabhbhai Patel's leadership, farmers' strong resolve, Hindu-Muslim unity, and the threat of a national satyagraha all shook the British Empire, and eventually the government had to give in and reduce the tax to 6.03%. The official decree was issued to return the land and animals of all farmers. The significance of the victory of Bardoli Satyagraha can be understood by these words of Gandhiji. Whatever be the Bardoli struggle, it is not a struggle for the attainment of Swaraj, but every such struggle and effort is a step forward in the direction to attain Swaraj. It was his success in the Bardoli Satyagraha that made Vallabhbhai Patel Sardar Patel, and it was the women of Bardoli who first bestowed the title of Sardar on him, and which Gandhiji repeated during a crowded meeting. It has been more than 9 decades since Bardoli Satyagraha. The Congress stood with farmers then and continued to do so even after independence. The Congress has never stopped raising its voice to protect the interests of India's farmers. Even today, farmers are being persecuted in the same way, whether it is taxes on farming equipment, black laws, or repression of their voices. If everything is the same as before, then our fight has to be the same as well. The battle which is fought by ignoring the distinction of religion, caste, region, class, sect, color, race is the only one which is successful. To save the country's heritage, we must eradicate discrimination, forget differences, and only think of the nation. Only then we will be able to save the heritage of our ancestors. After the non-cooperation movement, regular Congress sessions were keeping people full of energy and enthusiasm. During this time, 2 big decisions were taken during the 1927 Congress session in Madras: the call to boycott Simon Commission and the resolution for Purna Swaraj. The British government had created a commission to review the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919. Sir John Simon was the chairman of this commission, and his job was to examine the reforms of 1919 in accordance with Indian interests. It was sheer arrogance on the part of British that they created a commission to look into Indian interests but did not have a single Indian as a member. It would be like when laws are made in the interest of farmers without including the opinions of any farmers. Not including a single Indian in the commission was an insult to Indians. Based on this insult, all self-respecting Indians decided to oppose the Simon Commission. From Mahatma Gandhi to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Congress party along with the countrymen stood in opposition to the Simon Commission. On 3rd February 1928, as soon as the Simon Commission stepped on India's land, the whole country went on strike. The only answer the dictatorial forces had to these legitimate protests was repression, because their very foundation would shake with every call to protest. One such lathi of the British rule killed the revolutionary leader of Congress party, Lala Lajpat Rai. And Lalaji's last declaration was, "Every single stick hit on my body would prove to be the last nail in the coffin of the British rule." Under the pressure of the Simon Commission, the Council of India Act of 1935 was implemented, through which Indians got the right to administer provincial governance. Therefore, in the first provincial election of 1937, a large number of Indians won, and the Congress got an overwhelming majority from all over the country. In the next episode of Dharohar, you will see how the Nehru Report lobbied strongly for Indians against the Simon Commission. In all of India's most difficult moments, Congress has stood like a wall, protecting the nation and its people. Jai Hind. The British Empire had become so arrogant that they believed Indians were incapable in all respects. Even while setting up the Simon Commission, the Britishers did not include a single Indian by claiming that Indians were not capable of making a constitution. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, along with Congress leaders and countrymen, was deeply offended by their arrogance and their drive to discount the abilities of Indians. At the Madras session of 1927, Congress accepted the challenge of the British Empire to draft the constitution, thus giving birth to the Nehru Report. A committee headed by Motilal Nehru was formed to draft the constitution and Jawaharlal Nehru was appointed the secretary. The committee also included Subhash Chandra Bose, Tej Bahadur Sapru, Ali Imam, M.S. Annie, Mangal Singh, Shuab Qureshi and G.R. Pradhan as its members. In a mere 8 months, on 28 August 1928, the Nehru Committee completed and submitted the draft of the constitution. It was a slap in the face of the British government, who doubted the intelligence and competence of Indians. Whenever any arrogant power has dared to consider India or Indians as inferior, our people have always given a befitting reply. The Nehru Report, which was prepared based on recommendations of all parties, spoke of dominion status for the country, even though young Congress leaders like Pandit Nehru and Netaji were in favour of Purna Swaraj. Not only this, equal voting rights for both men and women who were 21 years of age, along with 19 other fundamental rights, were advocated in the Nehru Report. The Nehru Report recommended secularism, the establishment of the Supreme Court, and the independence of the judiciary were given priority. Additionally, the Nehru Report demanded that the fundamental rights of every Indian cannot be taken away. In effect, the Nehru Report laid out the blueprint of the Indian Constitution. Whenever our Constitution has been attacked, Congress has stood with the Indian people to stop the tyrannical powers. Our Constitution not only gives us hope, but also a path to growth. It is our duty to protect it. Jai Hind. After the partition of Bengal in 1905, the demand for Swaraj, which arose from the Calcutta Congress session in 1906, started gaining momentum. And after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, it was further strengthened by young revolutionary leaders like Pandit Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. The year was 1929. On the banks of the Ravi River in Lahore, the Congress was in session and the president was a young Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehruji, in his presidential address, called for an India free of foreign rule. In order to strengthen his resolve for Purna Swaraj, Pandit Nehru unfurled the Indian tricolour in the middle of the night on the banks of the Ravi River as a token of Indian independence. It was this Lahore Congress session which sent out the message across the country to celebrate 26th January 1930 as the first Independence Day of the country. Apart from this, along with the decision to boycott the Round Table Conference, a resolution was passed which declared Purna Swaraj as the ultimate aim of the Congress party. All senior leaders of Congress, along with Gandhiji, decided to start a countrywide civil disobedience movement to support the demand for Purna Swaraj. The willingness to sacrifice anything for the nation was widespread amongst the participants at the Lahore session, making it an extremely integral moment. The extensive support from the people compelled Pandit Nehru to say in no uncertain terms, "Our aim is independence, and for us, independence means complete freedom." The oath of Swaraj taken at the Lahore Congress session in 1929 materialized 17 years later on 15th August 1947. But in this journey of Purna Swaraj, our ancestors made immeasurable sacrifices, faced attack after attack, and defeated the British policy of divide and rule in order to achieve their ultimate goal. We must ensure that we do not let their sacrifices and struggles go in vain. Jai Hind. Inspired by the Nehru Report, Indians resolved to ensure the sun finally sets on the British Empire. 90 years ago, with this resolution and a fistful of salt, the very foundation of the British Empire was completely shaken up. The British government had imposed a steep tax on the production and purchase of salt in India. In other words, the land was ours, the salt was ours, but the Britishers had the control. But the British government underestimated the importance of salt to Indians. On 12th March 1930, Bapu announced the Dandi March to defy the salt law. On March 12th, Bapu, with a hand-picked group of 78 volunteers, marched from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi. But after covering 240 miles in 24 days, on April 6th, they found that thousands of supporters had joined Gandhiji and reached Dandi. As the first rays of sun dawned at 6:30 a.m., Gandhiji picked up a handful of salt on the beach of Dandi and said, "With this, I would shake the foundation of the British Empire." With the salt satyagraha came the arrest of freedom fighters and the lathis of the British Empire. Thousands of agitators, including Pandit Nehru, Sardar Patel, C. Rajgopalachari, were jailed. Lathis came thundering down, but the people of India, who had dreamt of complete independence, would not be frightened. Even Bapu was arrested on 5th May, but by then the entire nation had been influenced by the salt satyagraha. And in order to boycott British salt, Indians across the country began producing their own. This satyagraha, which challenged the British tyranny, attracted the attention of the whole world. The greatest success of the salt satyagraha was the participation of all castes and classes, from Hindus to Muslims. Whenever Indians have chosen to ignore divisions and remained united, tyrannical forces have always been uprooted. But when we are divided into caste, religion, class, color, region, our country becomes weak. It is our responsibility to ensure our nation is never weakened. Jai Hind. When Bapu made salt at the seashore of Dandi, he did not simply break the anti-people British law, but also shattered their false pride. And with Indians across the country defying the draconian salt law, the authority of the narcissist British Empire was directly challenged. Gandhiji's call to break the salt law echoed loud and clear across the country. C. Rajgopalachari carried out the Vedaranyam Salt March in Tamil Nadu. The people of Northeast carried out a salt march from Sylhet to Noakhali. While people of Kerala were breaking the salt law by marching from Calicut to Payyanur, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, famously known as Frontier Gandhi, was holding fort in the northwestern region. To weaken this movement, the British arrested Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel, but failed miserably in their aim to deter it. Congress decided to make Dharasana, situated 25 miles south of Dandi, the next epicenter of the salt satyagraha. Following the arrest of Bapu, Nehru, Sardar Patel, Abbas Tayyabji, Kasturba, and other senior Congress leaders, Sarojini Naidu took the lead. On 21st May, the 2,500 protesters marching towards Dharasana salt factory were subject to a ruthless lathi charge. American journalist Webb Miller called out this barbaric act by the British. In the past 18 years, as a correspondent, I have witnessed countless incidents of citizens' revolt and riots, but nothing compares to the terrifying scenes I've witnessed at Dharasana. Apart from the barbaric act at Dharasana, more than 60,000 people were arrested during the salt satyagraha, but their spirit remained intact. The salt satyagraha, which centered around the matter of our salt, can also be called a struggle for Indian self-respect. Whenever dictatorial powers or regimes have hurt our self-respect, the sun has always set on their tyrannical rule. The salt satyagraha showed us that the arrogance of the high and mighty stands no chance in front of Indian self-respect. Our unbreakable unity, unconditional and selfless love for our nation made all this possible, and we must all strive to ensure this stays intact. Jai Hind. The echo of the salt satyagraha that erupted from the banks of Dandi in 1930 showed not only the path of civil disobedience to the entire nation, but also instilled enthusiasm and confidence in the citizens that the tyrannical British rule could be brought down to its knees with strength of solidarity and perseverance. The Congress, through their regular conventions, was not letting the public lose their sense of enthusiasm and confidence for defeating British rule. During this time, the Congress session was held in 1931 in Karachi under its president Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. In this session, Congress passed a resolution on fundamental rights and economic policy. Under the leadership of Sardar Patel, the draft was prepared by Jawaharlal Nehru. This consistency and cooperation has been a strong tradition of Congress Party, which despite the many lies has remained strong till date. In this session, it was decided that Gandhiji would represent India at the second Roundtable Conference in London. Fearing Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent movement and his growing popularity among the masses, the British government declared Congress an illegal institution in the year 1932-33. In several places, the Congress offices were locked, but these tactics of the British Empire could neither break the spirits of the Congress nor could it reduce the enthusiasm of the public at large. Each and every Congress worker dealt with these malicious tactics and became a torchbearer of the freedom struggle while suffering the atrocities and lathis at the hands of the British Empire. Throughout it all, the Indian people stood with Congress Party. In June 1934, the Congress for the first time emphasized that a Constituent Assembly of Indians should be established to make the constitution of the country. Meanwhile, in October 1934, the Bombay session of the Congress was held under the chairmanship of Dr. Rajendra Prasad, in which the Congress amended its constitution to make non-violence and Khadi movement the fundamental basis. The British Empire was meanwhile creating a conspiracy to suppress the voice of Indian people during this time. But even the Britishers could not succeed in their sinister endeavours because it is impossible to suppress the voices that speak truth. Nothing can defeat those that fight for nothing but national interest. Jai Hind. Founded in 1885, the Congress Party by 1935 had not only completed 50 years of struggle for freedom, but it had also become the voice of the nation during this half-century. Because of the Congress's selfless and fearless spirit in its fight against the British and for its inherent values of never bowing down, people's faith in the Congress Party grew as the freedom struggle intensified. In these 50 years, Congress gave a new direction to the Indian freedom movement due to the powerful leadership.
मेरी तो आशा ये है, ईश्वर से प्रार्थना ये है कि हिंदुस्तान ऐसा बने कि जिससे सारी दुनिया कहे कि अगर आज़ाद बनना है तो हिंदुस्तान के जैसे आज़ाद बनो। ऐसा करने में आप लोग बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा दे सकते हैं। सब के सब अपनी जगह पर अपना धर्म का पालन करें तो हिंदुस्तान जैसा मैं आपको कहता हूँ ऐसा बन सकता है, उसमें मुझको तनिक भी शंका नहीं है।
Right from the partition of Bengal to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, from farmers' movement to the Dandi Salt March, the solidarity demonstrated by every class, religion, caste, community and region with the leadership of the Congress was a clear sign of the imminent downfall of the British rule. The Congress has now completed 135 years of its journey, and even today the country faces challenges similar to the British rule. And even today, Congress stands rock solid to safeguard the soul, the constitution, the democracy and the ethos of Bharat Mata. Be it farmers, soldiers, women or the underprivileged, the Congress Party stands firmly with every section of the society. Even today, the Congress does not fear police batons, brutality or even going to jail when it comes to raising its voice against the atrocities of those in power. The Congress Party is always committed to uphold the dignity of our beloved motherland and of the tricolour. Jai Hind. Having completed 50 years of its struggle for freedom in 1935, the Congress Party decided to take the fight to a decisive stage. The year was 1936. The Congress session was held in Lucknow and its president was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. On the 28th of February, just a few days before the session, Pandit Nehru's wife Kamala Nehru passed away. But Congressmen and women who dreamt of Bharat Mata's freedom every moment had left personal grief and setbacks far behind. In this session, Pandit Nehru included Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, Rajendra Prasad, Acharya Narendra Dev, Jai Prakash Narayan, Rajaji, Achyut Patwardhan in his working committee. No matter how deep a web of propaganda is being spun today, the reality is our ancestors stood shoulder to shoulder, united, in their fight for freedom, which is why they were ultimately successful. In this session, Congress formulated a policy to enter both levels of the two-tier parliamentary system and established the Congress Parliamentary Board for its operationalization. Even the farmers were agitating against the atrocities of the British rule in Awadh and different parts of the country. Realizing the need of the hour, the Congress during the Lucknow session tasked the Congress Working Committee to prepare a plan to improve the condition of the farmers of the country. A direct reflection of these sound policies was seen with the abolition of the Zamindari and the Jagirdari systems after the independence. In this session, Congress made a shift towards Pandit Nehru's socialist ideas. Socialism backed by democratic ways was supported. It was also Mahatma Gandhiji's thought that Congress sessions be held in villages, since India truly lives in its villages. Heeding to his words, the next two sessions of the Congress were held in villages in Maharashtra and Gujarat. The Congress felt and acknowledged the strong involvement of villagers and farmers in the freedom struggle. Prioritizing and working for the prosperity of villages and farmers, the Congress has always fought for the interests of the Annadata. Even today, Congress is fighting this battle. Jai Hind. The struggle for freedom was the struggle for self-rule. It was after sustained struggles, movements and sacrifices that Indians got the right to self-rule in 1935, which was an important step towards our freedom. It was due to the right to manage provincial governance derived from the Government of India Act of 1935 that provincial elections were held in 1937. The people of India reposed their faith in Congress in the first ever provincial elections and put aside all communal propaganda and division to ensure Congress won 707 seats. This way, the Congress emerged as the largest party which formed governments in 7 out of 11 provinces, with the support and trust of the people of the country. This trust and support by the people was earned by the Congress due to the fierce struggle for independence. Congress only formed the provincial governments after it was assured by the British of no undue interference by the Governor-General. The Congress party was adamant it would not breach the trust of the people by changing its stance on self-rule. This was the reason why Congress resigned from all provincial governments when the British forced India into World War II without consulting the elected Indian governments. There was no question of compromising on the pride of the nation while fighting for its independence. However, in spite of this, there were some political parties that were so desperate for power, they remained in the provincial governments and thus weakened India's struggle for freedom. The results of the provincial election had made it clear that it was the Congress who will be acting as the catalyst for development of independent India. The provincial election results were also a hint towards the downfall of the British rule and the rise of a democratic India. Today, those same democratic values are being crushed, voices are being gagged. Farmers are being called Khalistanis and terrorists for demanding their rights. It is our collective duty to protect our democracy and repose faith in our nation and people. Jai Hind. By the 1937 provincial elections, the Congress party had tremendous support from the people of the country. After the formation of the ministries, the major challenge before the Congress was to stand true to the expectations of the people. The Congress ministries did their best in this direction. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru said, "The biggest problem which India faces is the problem of the farmers. Everything else comes after it. We should be loyal to our promises and meet the expectations the farmers have and satisfy them." This statement by Pandit Nehru as Congress president was welcomed by all and resulted in the Tennessee Bill, which was enacted by all Congress-ruled provinces. In the Bombay province, the Congress government was even able to return the previously seized or sold land back to the farmers. In all states ruled by the Congress, the party took important steps to save farmers from money lenders and to increase irrigation facilities. Congress had promised to release all political prisoners and people under house arrest in its election manifesto. Therefore, Gandhiji himself went to Calcutta and released 1100 prisoners despite Bengal not having a Congress government. The Congress government in the United Province also released many prisoners. Prominent among the released were the accused of the Kakori train robbery case, who under the leadership of Pandit Ram Prasad Bismil had given sleepless nights to the British. The nation wholeheartedly welcomed this decision by the Congress government. In fact, when the governors of UP and Bihar stopped the release of the prisoners, the Congress prime ministers of both the provinces immediately resigned, and ultimately the British had to relent. A promise made to the people is a commitment to the Congress, not a mere jumla. We have always been resolved to fulfill our promises. The progressive steps taken by the Congress provincial governments in its 28 months tenure laid the foundation for decisions taken by the Congress government immediately after independence, which led India on its path to progress. There is still so much more to know about the achievements of the Congress provincial governments. Jai Hind. There are only two parties in India, one which is fighting for the interests of the common people, while other which is against the common people. The Congress is entering the provincial assemblies to oust the Khan Bahadurs, Raja Bahadurs and Nawabs who are close to the British government. This statement, made by Pandit Nehru in Allahabad during the 1937 election campaign, was completely believed by the people, and Congress also upheld the trust reposed in it after winning the elections. The provincial governments of Congress took major steps such as making provisions for leave with pay, minimum wages, and recognition of the labour unions by the state. Congress-ruled provinces in British India witnessed decisions like Rs 2 lakh subsidy for khadi and hand-woven clothing industry, appointment of honorary health officers in hospitals, minimizing the expenses towards construction of public buildings, free and compulsory education up to 7 years, cutting down ministerial emoluments, declaration of fundamental rights, welfare schemes for the tribals, and repealing of oppressive coal mining law. And when the British forced the country into the Second World War against its will, the provincial governments of Congress, without any hesitation, resigned immediately. Although there were some political parties who unethically stuck to power. Congress laid the foundation of eminent institutions like IITs and IIMs after independence. It made serfdom illegal through the Zamindari Act of 1950. Vital steps to save water, forest and land resources were also taken. Congress understands the legacy of the country because Congress is an integral part of the legacy of India.
याद दिलाना चाहता हूँ उस जमाने की जब बगैर फौज के, बगैर हथियार के, बगैर किसी ज़ाहिरी सहारे के, बगैर पैसे के इस मुल्क की आज़ादी की लड़ाई लड़ी गई थी। हमारे किसानों ने, हमारे बेचारे अदना से अदना, गरीब से गरीब आदमियों ने लड़ी थी। उनके ऊपर बोझा पड़ा था इसका। कैसे वो जीते? अपनी हिम्मत से, अपने दम से।
There is still so much more to know about the achievements of the Congress provincial governments. Jai Hind. Bapu always believed that India's soul lived in its villages. During the freedom struggle, the villages of India were relying on the Congress, and the Congress was doing everything it could to reach out to them. In this regard, in 1936, the first rural session of the Congress was organized in the village of Faizpur in Maharashtra.
महात्मा गांधी जी राष्ट्रपति जवाहरलाल के पास बैठे हुए लेक्चर दे रहे हैं। मंडप में हजारों आदमी उनके उपदेश का लाभ उठा रहे हैं।
The president of this session was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and the most important resolution was passed: the demand for a constituent assembly. The issue of exclusion of Indians from the Simon Commission and the demand for a constitution had gained momentum. Following which, the Nehru Report came into existence, and now the Congress explicitly demanded the formation of the Constituent Assembly. After this, the 1938 Congress session was also held in Haripura village of Gujarat, and its president was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose.
Our struggle is no doubt a non-violent struggle, but even a non-violent struggle demands an army, an organization, and a machinery.
In this session, Netaji formed the National Planning Committee under the leadership of Pandit Nehru. In this session of Congress, also called for the release of the Naga leader, Rani Gaidinliu, who raised the voice for freedom in the jungles of Assam. Young congressmen like Nehruji and Netaji were in favor of Purna Swaraj, so the demand for Purna Swaraj for all states was strongly advocated for. During this session, the Congress party rejected the British Empire's new constitution, stating that the Indian constitution would be based on freedom and would be designed by the Constituent Assembly without any foreign interference. Not only this, the Congress in 1938 also advocated for free and compulsory education in the mother tongue. Congress was determined to build a modern India after independence. Our ancestors struggled a great deal to create a modern and thriving India. We must not let their struggles be in vain. We have to ensure we keep their idea of India alive. On one hand, there was the freedom struggle, and on the other hand, the struggle to protect the interests of the farmers. Not only did Bharat Mata need to be independent, but the sons of the soil, the Annadata, also had to be prosperous. The entire Congress party, including Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel, were working with this idea at the heart of it all. Congress reached the villages through its sessions where it listened to the farmers and formulated village-centric policies. It refused to take advantage of troubling times unlike present regime. The Congress in its 1936 Faizpur session took the important step of adopting an all-India agricultural program. This session also constituted provincial committees and instructed them to formulate provincial agricultural programs based on local issues. The major objectives of this pan-India agriculture program were significant reduction in tenancy revenue, reducing the loan liability of the farmers, relieving farmers of their pending dues, restoration of the lands which were either sold or seized during non-cooperation movement, fixed working time to 8 hours without reducing pay, measures to increase employment, and most important of all, repealing of the black laws. The Congress was fighting against the British, demanding repeal of oppressive laws even then. The situation today is very similar, except that instead of the British, their followers are in power.
किसानों को पूरा दाम न मिले या तो बहुत कम दाम मिले, तो ऐसा तो होना नहीं चाहिए। तो किसानों को ज़्यादा दाम दें, वो तो मैं समझ सकूंगा, और वो किसानों को ज़्यादा दाम देते हैं, इससे कोई दाम बढ़ता है, वो तो दूसरी बात हो गई। सच्चा हिसाब करने की बात हुई तो हिसाब सच्चा करें।
Even the mighty British had fantasized about ruling India by weakening the farmers of the country, but they had to ultimately relent and retreat. Our farmers are the soul of our nation, and whoever tries to oppress them will find Congress standing firmly against them. Because farmers make this country. Jai Hind. During the freedom struggle, the Congress on one hand was fighting for the independence of the country, while on the other hand, it was also formulating policies conducive to an independent India. Congress had envisaged a prosperous India after independence, for which strong policies for industrial development were imperative. The country had already conveyed its trust in the Congress through the verdict of the 1937 provincial elections. Maintaining this trust, the Congress in 1938 constituted the National Planning Committee under the leadership of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru for laying a strong foundation for the economic development of the country. National poet Rabindranath Tagore and Meghnad Saha compelled Pandit Nehru to become the chairman of this committee. The committee was entrusted to work in the areas of agriculture, industry, demographic relations, business, transport, public welfare, education, and the role of women in a planned economy, so that a broad national plan for the solution of poverty, unemployment, national defense, and general economic emancipation could be formulated. Essentially, the Congress aimed at encouraging a small and cottage industry-based model for the industrialization of the country while treading the path of non-cooperation with the British. The Congress, through the National Planning Committee, was trying to solve the problem of unemployment, encourage social values, compete with foreign industry, and improve the standard of living for the common people. This committee also laid emphasis on self-reliance or Atmanirbharta and planning for economic development.
We have to think always, together with any planned scheme of development, there should be a planned scheme of that development or other developments immediately taking effect with the masses of our people.
These development programs had the support of top leaders like Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad and Acharya Kripalani. This policy formulation by Congress, even before India gained independence, underlined the fact that our nation was ready to be an independent sovereign country. Overall, the vision of Congress was clear: to lay a strong foundation of an India which had its distinct identity in the world, and Congress was successful in this endeavour. Jai Hind. When confronted with the choice between the nation and power, some parties might opt for power, but for the Congress, the country has always come first and will always be so. Because the Congress, along with the countrymen, have contributed to the making of independent India. The Tripuri session of the Congress in 1939 is the perfect example of Congress Party's dedication to the nation. In this session, the party decided to resign from all provincial ministries because of the British Empire's continuous interference as well as the forced participation of Indians in the Second World War. The Congress believed this was disrespectful to the Indian people. The 1940 session held at Ramgarh had Maulana Abul Kalam Azad as its president.
अगर हमने जिम्मेदारी का बोझ उठाया है तो तरह तरह की परेशानियां हमें पेश आएंगी। अगर हम मैदान में दौड़ रहे हैं तो कदम कदम पर हमको ठोकरों से दो चार होना पड़ेगा। उससे हमें घबराना नहीं चाहिए, उससे हमें उकताना नहीं चाहिए। मर्द बनकर उन तमाम जिम्मेदारियों को उठाना चाहिए और उन परेशानियों का मुकाबला करना चाहिए।
In this session, it was decided that Congress would adopt the policy of non-cooperation during the Second World War. It is common knowledge that there were certain individuals who received a pension from the British rulers and carried out a drive to recruit Indians into the British Army. The Ramgarh session called for a national government that restarted the civil disobedience movement at this time. After this, and until 1946, no more Congress sessions were held because all the senior leaders of the party were arrested, and the British government declared the Congress an illegal entity for its participation in the freedom movement. Even though the session did not take place, the fight for freedom continued. Even today, the Congress is fighting for the rights of the citizens of our country. The only difference is that today the country is independent and the British have been replaced by similar ideological rulers. The nation and the Congress won the fight against the British. And even now, nor would the country be defeated or would be the Congress. Jai Hind. 1942 can also be considered to be the year of the last nail in the coffin of British rule in India. This is the year when the entire nation spoke in one voice to demand the British leave India.
अंग्रेजों! भारत छोड़ो! अंग्रेजों! भारत छोड़ो!
This is the story of the movement and the revolution which ultimately set the sun on the British Empire. On 8th of August 1942, history would be made. The Congress Working Committee met in Bombay on this day and unanimously adopted the Quit India resolution under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. The CWC also decided to take up the civil disobedience movement for immediate independence of Bharat Mata from the clutches of British rule. This session declared its commitment to independence, to save the country from all forms of imperialism and fascism, and to form a provisional government after the British rule ended.
The clock of destiny is ticking away, and war and danger hover over the world. We shall have to face their consequences also, and we can only face them by forgetting our petty troubles and conflicts and pulling all together so that we might, by our united strength, make India independent.
For the success of the Quit India movement, Gandhiji urged all government employees not to give up their jobs but remain loyal to the Congress. He asked soldiers to be loyal to the army but not to open fire on fellow countrymen and freedom fighters. Farmers were asked to stop paying rent to landlords that aligned with the British government. Students were asked to become completely sure before leaving their studies. Gandhiji appealed to the citizens of princely states to oppose their rulers who were loyal to the British. Between Gandhiji's call to quit India and the objectives of the movement, there is a reason why 9th August was chosen as the day to begin the campaign. The story of Quit India movement is only just beginning, and it will end once India finally gained independence. Jai Hind.
there is a small mantra which I give you. Imbibe this in your heart and express it with every breath. The mantra is do or die. In this endeavor of ours, we will either attain independence or sacrifice our lives. We will not be alive to witness the crime of our slavery.
After the CWC adopted the Quit India Movement resolution on 8th August, Bapu's war cry of do or die, proclaimed from Govalia tank ground, spread across the country like wildfire. 9th August is very important to India's freedom struggle. It was exactly 17 years before the Quit India movement that on 9th August, revolutionaries under the leadership of Pandit Ram Prasad Bismil shook the foundations of British Empire by executing Kakori train robbery. To commemorate this day, Bhagat Singh started the tradition of celebrating 9th August as Kakori Incident Memorial Day, on which day a large number of youth participated. Both Bismil and Bhagat Singh had long gone, but this tradition lived on, and so did a deep respect for their martyrdom in the hearts and minds of Bapu and the Congress party. Therefore, as an emotional tribute to these revolutionaries, Bapu and the Congress party chose 9th August for the commencement of the Quit India movement. This strategy of Bapu and Congress was gaining success. The reverberations of Bapu's war cry could be felt in the breath and soul, blood and body of each Indian citizen. However, certain organizations who considered British as their masters were not only dreaming to foil the Quit India movement, but were also actively opposing it. Despite this, the Congress's strategy for the Quit India movement, Bapu's war cry, and each Indian's defiance were enough to shatter the foundations of the British Empire. As a result, Bharat Mata would achieve her independence and her citizens would proudly see the tricolour unfurling in the skies. Jai Hind. In an effort to manipulate Indians into joining the Second World War, the British tried to implement the Cripps mission. At the same time, they did not want to give Indian independent self-rule, but the Congress would not settle for anything else. Hence, on 14th July 1942, the Congress Working Committee in Wardha rejected the Cripps mission and adopted the Quit India Movement resolution. After this, on 8th August 1942, the Congress passed a proposal for the Quit India Movement under the leadership of Gandhiji. But the British, after arresting Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Sarojini Naidu, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, along with all the members of the Congress Working Committee, declared Congress an illegal organization. And therefore, the entire nation began demonstrating and holding strikes against the British rulers. On August 9, 1942, Aruna Asaf Ali gave further impetus to the movement by hoisting the tricolour at the Govalia tank ground. The movement spread and the tricolour began being hoisted on government buildings across the country. However, it was during the movement that 7 students were killed while trying to unfurl the flag at the Secretariat building in Patna. The British rulers banned the publication of news related to the movement. By the end of 1942, almost 1 lakh Indians were jailed and around 10,000 were killed. The movement witnessed enthusiastic participation by women and common people who took leadership in their own hands.
एक जोश ऐसा था, मैं क्या कहूँ, हम हथियारबंद तो लोग थे नहीं उस वक्त, निहत्थे थे, मगर फिर भी जिस तरह से लोगों ने पुलिस का मुकाबला किया, फौज का मुकाबला किया, उसका बयान करना बहुत मुश्किल है। मगर इतना कहना चाहती हूँ कि हिंदुस्तान की औरतें और मर्द तय कर चुके थे, ये जो आग सुलगी है अब हम इसमें झुलस जाएंगे, मगर हम आज़ादी लेकर ही हटेंगे। और गांधी जी ने भी अपने संदेश में यही कहा, डू और डाई।
We still have to fight the mentality which opposed the Quit India movement. We will be able to win this battle only if we are united and have love and respect for our motherland in our hearts. Our ancestors had the same feeling while fighting the British. Jai Hind. The incredible aspect about India's independence struggle was that the leaders who fought the hardest for India's independence were never in it for the power. They only had the nation's interest at heart. So much so that former Congress President Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose even fought for our freedom while living in a different country.
हम दिल्ली दिल्ली जाएंगे, हम बिगड़ी हिंद बनाएंगे, हम दिल्ली दिल्ली जाएंगे, हम बिगड़ी हिंद बनाएंगे। अब फौजी बनकर रहना है, दुख दर्द मुसीबत सहना है। अब फौजी बनकर रहना है, दुख दर्द मुसीबत सहना है। सुभाष का कहना है, चलो दिल्ली चल के रहना है।
In 1942, while the Quit India movement was at its peak, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose challenged the British through Azad Hind Fauj. During the Second World War, Britain lost a battle to Japan, and as a result, thousands of Indian soldiers fighting for the British Empire were taken as prisoners in Japan. Under the supervision of Captain Mohan Singh, all of these imprisoned soldiers were inducted in the Azad Hind Fauj. On 4th July 1943, when Netaji was made the Supreme Commander of Azad Hind Fauj, he said to these soldiers,
I am confident that with the help of my countrymen in East Asia, I shall be able to organize such a gigantic force as will be able to sweep away the British power from India in conjunction with those who have already been fighting at home.
This speech invigorated those Indian origins, and the Azad Hind Fauj, which consisted of only 16,300 soldiers, quickly grew to 1,05,000 brigades strong. The brigades were named Gandhi, Nehru, Subhash, Maulana Azad and Rani Lakshmi Bai. So the false propaganda being circulated these days isn't our legacy. Our legacy is the golden history of Azad Hind Fauj, in which Netaji had dedicated the names of 2 brigades to Gandhiji and Pandit Nehru. Because Netaji knew that it was the Gandhi, Nehru, Maulana Azad trio that would maintain brotherhood and unity in the nation. The story of this legacy is not over yet. Jai Hind. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was also fighting for that tricolour which was leading the whole India and which was a symbol of Indian feelings, brotherhood, culture and traditions. Netaji raised the bar for the fight for freedom by raising the slogan, "You give me your blood and I will give you the freedom."
The final fight for India's independence has begun. The Azad Hind Fauj is fighting on the soil of Hindustan, moving ahead despite all obstacles. This armed struggle will go on until the British rule is uprooted from the country, until the tricolour is hoisted at the Viceroy's house in Delhi.
This was Netaji's address to his beloved country. But the next address was dedicated to that beloved leader who had inspired Netaji to join the freedom struggle and even become the national president of the Indian National Congress. His next words were,
Rashtrapita, we seek your blessings in this fight for Hindustan's independence.
Netaji dedicated these words to Gandhiji. This address to the nation by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose that aired on 6 July 1944 on Azad Hind Radio from Japan became such a legacy that it fills one with pride even today. This speech expressed 2 important points: the wish to hoist the tricolour and a deep respect for Gandhiji. Also, by expressing his tremendous respect for Gandhiji, Netaji gave a clear message that he might have started his fight for independence from Japan, but it was Gandhiji who was the real commander of the struggle for independence, which is why Netaji addressed Gandhiji as the father of the nation. A point to be noted though is that the tricolour for which Netaji waged a war was discarded by a divisionary ideology after independence. They refused to even hoist it. But we Indians stand firmly with our legacy and will always do so. Jai Hind. Netaji's Azad Hind Fauj fought a fierce battle with the British Army for the independence of the country. But due to lack of resources, untimely monsoon, the Azad Hind Fauj had to bear the brunt, and as a result, 11,000 Azad Hind Fauj soldiers were brought to Delhi as prisoners of war. The British wanted a trial at Red Fort against the brave soldiers of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, which included Azad Hind Fauj officers like Major General Shahnawaz Khan, Colonel Prem Kumar and Colonel Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon. The Congress constituted the INA Defence Committee to not only defend the soldiers in court but also ensure dignified prisoner of war treatment to the soldiers. The Congress Defence Committee, which included eminent lawyers like Bhulabhai Desai, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Tej Bahadur Sapru, Asaf Ali and Kadju, was formed as a part of the same committee. Public sympathy was with the soldiers during the trials, so much so that the Indian soldiers working in the British Army stood united with the Azad Hind Fauj in this matter. The Air Force units of Kanpur, Kohat, Allahabad, Bamrauli even contributed financially for the INA soldiers. The Red Fort trials finished in May 1946. All the three officers, General Shahnawaz, Colonel Prem Sehgal and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, were sentenced to expulsion from the country. But the court verdict was never executed. The Indian Army revolted against the British Empire, and just as Netaji had said,
every patriotic Indian must advance towards the field of battle. Only when the blood of freedom-loving Indians begins to flow will India attain her freedom. Inqilab Zindabad. Azad Hind Zindabad.
His dream was about to come true. Jai Hind. 15th August 1947. It was the much-awaited moment in the freedom struggle for which uncountable men and women sacrificed themselves, suffered, bore jail torture, lost dear ones, took baton and bullet bravely, but did not deter from the aim of independence. The Indian Independence Act of 1947 had put a stamp on India's independence. And with this, not only did India get freedom from 200-year-old British slavery, but the sun also set for the British Empire. This independence meant India's own government, the rule of Indians, and the rights of Indians. This independence meant breathing freely, freedom from atrocities and freedom from the feeling of low self-esteem. This independence meant our own flag, our own sky and self-respect. This independence meant success of our struggles, the result of our sacrifices and victory of the long wait. This independence meant the sun had set for the British Empire and the sun rose for the foundation of modern India and new expectations. The Indian freedom struggle had perseverance for truth, the principle of non-violence, the power of civil disobedience, the energy of revolution and the inspiration of unity. The Indian independence inspired many colonies across the world to attain their respective freedom. The Indian freedom struggle gave the world a leader like Mahatma Gandhi. Hindustan got a leader like Pandit Nehru, a Sardar like Patel, revolutionaries like Bose, Bhagat Singh and Azad, along with scores of great men. It is said that to reach the top is not difficult, but to remain on top is difficult. Now India was confronted with this situation. The independence for which the struggle was on had been achieved. Now this independence was to be directed to a situation where India was ready to meet its future. Jai Hind. We may have attained independence, but to be successful in complete self-rule, the challenge was to form a strong cabinet and government. Given that all the people involved were only interested in the progress of the country, this challenge became much easier to overcome. The first cabinet of independent India reflected democratic values and included all ideologies. While Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ji became the Prime Minister with portfolios like Foreign Affairs, Science and Commonwealth, Sardar Patel ji held the post of Deputy Prime Minister with Home and Information and Broadcasting Ministry. Dr. Rajendra Prasad ji got Food and Agricultural Ministry. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad ji, Education Ministry. Sardar Baldev Singh ji, Defence Ministry. Babu Jagjeevan Ram ji, Labour Ministry. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur ji, Health Ministry. Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar ji, Law Ministry. And K.C. Niyogi ji got the responsibility of Relief and Rehabilitation Ministry. This cabinet, with its ideological, linguistic, and cultural diversity, represented the whole nation. After centuries of colonization, it was of paramount importance that the whole country together decided the path for making a modern independent India. The Congress Party ensured it would protect the faith that the people had reposed in the party before independence by adopting democracy instead of dictatorship. Once India gained freedom, in the first cabinet of independent India, positions were given even to leaders of opposing ideologies. Choosing the path of democracy was imperative because the journey India was about to begin for its tryst with destiny was to happen in a democratic manner. Jai Hind.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
The dream of a modern India was clearly evident in Pandit Jawaharlal Nehruji's speech delivered at the stroke of the midnight hour as India attained independence. This independence brought us to crossroads from where we had to choose for ourselves one clear path. Amidst speculations and prophecies by powerful forces in the world of India's sure disintegration, our leaders chose the path of democracy. At the moment of India's tryst with destiny, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehruji gave a message of hard work to Indians, saying, "The future is not one of ease and resting, but of incessant striving." It was the effort of all our leaders from Mahatma Gandhi to Nehruji, Sardar Patelji, Abul Kalam Azadji, that the freedom for which countrymen made countless sacrifices, they got the freedom they dreamed of. A freedom with equality, equanimity, kindness, fraternity, and brotherhood. But was this tryst with destiny as pleasant as it was visible on papers? No, because the forces that supported the British during the freedom struggle had succeeded in fulfilling their malicious two-nation theory, and their devious desires had led to the partition of the country as planned. India had achieved its independence, but it was scattered into pieces. Now the all-important task was to thread all these pieces together and make one indivisible India, the nation in which we breathe today. So whenever anybody attempts to divide this country on the lines of caste, religion, community or region, each countryman should stand, unwavered and undeterred, to oppose it. Only then will our destiny be preserved. Jai Hind. While we may have attained our independence, we were yet to be united. India was divided by caste, religion, community, and princely states. The biggest challenge in front of Gandhiji, Nehruji, and Patelji was to consolidate this independence into a united Hindustan, a Hindustan which belonged to everyone. The princely states had their own supremacy, but Pandit Nehru had clarified in no uncertain terms.
Independent India will not accept the divine rights of the princely states, and all the princely states who refuse to join the Constituent Assembly will be considered as the enemy of the states. None of the princely states can stand the might of the Indian army.
Sardar Patel and V.P. Menon were entrusted with the responsibility of negotiating with the princely states, who were informed of the merger with India by 15th August 1947.
तो हमारा काम ये है कि हम हिंदुस्तान में कोई भी प्रांत के पड़े हैं, हम हिंदुस्तानी हैं और हमारा प्रथम कर्तव्य हिंदुस्तान की हिफाजत, हिंदुस्तान की रक्षा।
Sardar Patel convinced the princely states about the intentions of the Congress and invited them to be part of India to jointly frame laws. Sardar Patel's methods worked, and all the princely states except for 6, including Junagadh, Hyderabad and Jammu Kashmir, accepted the merger offer. Junagadh through referendum, Hyderabad through Operation Polo and Jammu Kashmir through instrument of accession eventually became an integral part of India. Our forefathers fulfilled their responsibilities, struggled, attained independence, and ensured a unified Hindustan after independence. Now the onus lies on us to ensure their dreams don't shatter and Hindustan is not divided again. We must all make sure nobody is able to divide this nation using hate and violence. This will be the true homage to our ancestors. Jai Hind. Whenever there is a reference made to the unification of India, the names of vanguards like Sardar Patel, Pandit Nehru and VP Menon take prominence. These three leaders executed the task of unification of India perfectly, with understanding, restraint and cooperation, based on a strong bond of trust with one another. While on one end, Sardar Patel along with VP Menon were taking decisions based on their analysis of ground realities, on the other end, Pandit Nehru in his capacity as a Prime Minister not only stood firm with their decision but also supported them completely with strong policies and decisions. But the Nizam of Hyderabad was nurturing absurd dreams of joining Pakistan. When all humble efforts by Sardar Patel did not make a breakthrough, he sent the Indian Army to execute Operation Polo, to which finally the Nizam had to bow.
The men under my command were called upon to perform a superhuman task and against very heavy odds. There was no alternative for me left but to surrender.
The case was similar in Junagadh. Junagadh was a part of Sardar Patel's home state, so there was no way he would tolerate such a division. Ergo, Sardar Patel resorted to such clever tactics that the Nawab, who was dreaming of making Junagadh a part of Pakistan, had to himself abscond and take refuge in Pakistan. Pakistan's design to destabilize Kashmir, Sardar Patel deployed an air fleet on Delhi-Srinagar route. He also kept Pathankot, Amritsar and Jammu connected via telephone and telegraph lines. Watching Kashmir slip out of its clutches, Pakistan waged an attack. Under such circumstances, the Maharaja of Kashmir signed the instrument of accession, giving his consent to merge Jammu and Kashmir with India. Following which the Indian Army drove away Pakistani army from Kashmir, an integral part of India. Sardar Patel, the name that unified India, is being misused today by divisive forces to cling on to power, and there is a need to recognize this. Jai Hind. Amid the riots that followed the partition, there emerged a sinister idea, the plot to assassinate Gandhiji. Because Gandhiji was the biggest obstacle for the divisive and hateful ideological organizations. This idea became a reality on 30th January 1948, when Nathuram Godse shot Bapu thrice in the chest during his evening prayers. The greatest figure of peace, affection, brotherhood and unity, and the hero of the freedom struggle, had set out for his last journey. Later, Nathuram Godse's family itself revealed his relations with those divisive forces. Gandhiji's private secretary Pyare Lal also mentioned how those same organizations were distributing sweets after Gandhiji's assassination. According to a BBC report, the mouthpiece of RSS, the organizer, in its 11th January 1970 editorial clearly wrote, Gandhiji's assassination was an expression of the people's wrath. Gandhiji's assassination shook the entire nation, and the time came for bold decisions in order to keep the faith of the people intact. On 4th February, the faith was reposed in the form of a nationwide ban on the anarchic organization called RSS by the Iron Man of India and then Home Minister Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. He not only imposed a ban but also labelled the speeches of RSS as poisonous. As a result, many RSS workers were arrested 4 days after Gandhiji's assassination. Not just in 1970, but even today, these forces both worship Godse and continue their attempts to kill Gandhian ideology. On one hand, the BJP pretends to be followers of Gandhi, and on the other hand, they destroy his ideology by celebrating violence. Thriving under the shadow of the same RSS, which was banned by Sardar Patel, and pretending to respect Patel is sheer hypocrisy. Therefore, it is our responsibility that we neither let the Gandhian ideology die nor the dreams of Sardar Patel. We cannot let these anti-national forces succeed. Jai Hind. From Africa to Ahmedabad, labourers have always played an important role in Gandhiji's movements. Even during the freedom movement, they played an integral role, often giving up basic necessities to fight British brutalities. So when the country was about to gain independence, providing a voice to their cause was not only the duty of Congress Party, but also a moral responsibility. This responsibility came to fruition through the formation of Indian National Trade Union Congress. INTUC was established on 3rd May 1947 under the leadership of then Congress President Acharya J.B. Kripalani at the Constitution Club in Delhi. INTUC, which was founded based on the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, held its first conference with attendees like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Shankar Rao Dev, Babu Jagjeevan Ram, Ram Manohar Lohia, Aruna Asaf Ali, Maniben Patel, Gulzari Lal Nanda, G. Ramanujan, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Khadubai Desai and many more. This first conference had the presence of 200 trade unions and 5,65,000 members. It was clear that INTUC was successful in gaining the trust of labourers from day one. Then Congress President Acharya J.B. Kripalani in his presidential address said, "The proposed organisation should not hesitate to invent an infallible weapon like a strike if it is truly on the side of workers' interest." These words reflect the democratic attitude of the Congress Party, where the President was encouraging workers to strike in order to protect their interests despite representing the party in government. Since its foundation, INTUC has always strengthened the voice of labourers and ensured their rights are upheld. Even today, members of the organisation work tirelessly to fight the present dictatorial rule and protect the interests of our workers.
जैसे हमने लैंड एक्विजिशन की लड़ाई लड़ी थी, जैसे हम किसान के हक के लिए लड़े थे, वैसे हम INTUC के साथ आपके हक के लिए, मजदूरों के हक के लिए लड़ेंगे।
The farmer agitation against British atrocities gained momentum from Champaran to Kheda Satyagraha, and eventually the country attained independence. However, the result of this agitation was a broken agriculture sector, and the responsibility to put it back together fell on Pandit Nehru, Sardar Patel and the Congress Party. The Bhakra Nangal Dam was the fruit of their labour. In 1948, immediately after independence, the digging for this dam started. Finally, it was Pandit Nehru who on 17th November 1955 began the construction of this dam by laying the first bucket of concrete in the dry bed of Satluj River. While addressing the people gathered there, Pandit Nehru said, "This is a gift for the people of India and its future generations by the workers who are building it." Pandit Nehru, who called Bhakra a temple of modern India and a symbol of its progress, said, while dedicating this dam to the nation, "This dam has been constructed by men with tremendous hard work for the benefit of humanity and therefore is worth worshipping. You could call it a temple or a gurudwara or a mosque. It inspires appreciation and adulation." This was the vision of leaders like Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel. And for those who ask how this vision benefited our country, think of this. Even today, the Bhakra Nangal Dam stands as a symbol of development in India, and across states like Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan, over 40,000 square kilometers of crops can testify to it. Additionally, this dream of Pandit Nehru's produces over 1,325 megawatt of electricity that helps people across the country. But today, those dams that Pandit Nehru called the temple of modern India and the gods of those temples, our farmers, are being tortured and oppressed by tyrannical rulers. Today, the country needs an ideology which not only develops the nation but also respects the rights of farmers. Congress governments since independence have been working for the welfare of our farmers and has strengthened the legacy of the country. Jai Hind. The British rulers squeezed Indian resources to make as much profit as possible. On the other hand, when Congress came to power after independence, it chose never to profit from the nation. because the aim of the Congress was to create wealth for the nation and to serve the people by giving them freedom.
We say that our aim is a socialist pattern of society, something which affects the whole community, helps all the people in the country to raise their level of living and reduce the big differences that may exist.
Hence, the leaders of the time chose the path of nationalization over privatization. The governmentalization of Air India was the beginning of this process of nationalization. The government of India bought shares of J.R.D. Tata founded Air India. The name was changed to Air India International and international services began. The first international flight took off from Bombay to Heathrow Airport, London on 8th June. Inspired by its success, the Indian government started international flights to many countries between 1948 to 1950. In 1953, the government invoked the Air Corporation Act and completed the nationalization of Air India. This Maharaja supported the nation in its hour of need and accomplished many missions by saving the lives of citizens. But it collapsed in the existing blind race of privatization. It is sad to see the assets of the country being sold for peanuts, but profit is the sole motive of the present government, even if it has to sell the country's valuable assets. This isn't merely selling the assets of the country, but an outrageous act of selling its legacy. These people are trying to hide their failures by selling the assets of the nation to run their show. To accept this outrageous act will be to compromise with the ideals and sacrifices of this country. It is our duty to ensure this doesn't happen. Jai Hind. It was on 10th August 1948 that independent India took steps to strengthen itself by setting up Atomic Energy Commission. This is the story of the formation of Atomic Energy Commission. The atomic program was the brainchild of Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, which received guidance from stalwarts like Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel.
It shows the absolute necessity of finding some new source of energy if the light of our civilization is not to be extinguished because we have burnt out our fuel reserves. This would exhaust the known reserves of fossil fuels in under a century. It is in this context that we turn to atomic energy for a solution.
I venture to predict that a method will be found for liberating fusion energy in a controlled manner within the next 2 decades.
Homi Jahangir Bhabha, who fondly called Nehruji his brother, had caused a stir in 1965 when he declared that he could make an atom bomb in only 18 months. Dr. Bhabha diligently discharged his duty as the Secretary of Atomic Energy Commission. The basic objectives of the Atomic Energy Commission were to encourage research on atomic science, to train the atomic scientists, to encourage atomic research in the Commission's own labs, to discover atomic minerals in India and find their industrial use. This was a small step towards atomic energy independence, which has made us an atomic power today, and which not only gave us strength but also made us self-reliant. The 2008 nuclear deal with the USA was the result of the vision of Dr. Bhabha and leaders like Pandit Nehru and Sardar Patel, which not only gave us atomic energy but made us capable of forging treaties with other countries and allowed us to work more freely with the NSG. Such bold decisions taken 70 years ago by our ancestors laid the foundation for a strong India. So we should all be proud of this legacy. Jai Hind. Today, we'll be telling you the history of Reserve Bank of India, a bank which was called Bankers Bank, a bank which witnessed the economy falling, picking up and then falling again. A bank that has been a witness to the economic policies of this country. This bank was founded on 1st April 1935, but at the time it was in private hands. The aim of the Congress after independence was to create wealth for the country, and this happened with the nationalization of the Reserve Bank of India on 1st January 1949. The aim of the British had been to fleece Indian wealth, which was known as the Golden Bird, and they were successful to a very large extent. With independence came a devastated economy for the people of India and the Congress government. Addressing this, required creating an institution which made the country economically strong, an institution that could both create policies and focus on the nation's economic needs. This institution was the Reserve Bank of India. It proved to be successful because RBI was not only nationalized but also given powers through Banking Regulation Act. The effects were visible immediately after the first 5-year plan. One of the most successful Prime Ministers, Dr. Manmohan Singh, had also been the governor of the RBI. Simply put, RBI has always laid the path for India's economy. All in all, the success of the RBI has been in the hands of the common man and the currency of the Indian economy that has covered a long journey. From 1,25,823 lakh rupees in 1950 to 57,07,669 lakh rupees today. But today the same wealth is being eyed upon and its autonomy is under threat and its treasures are being plundered. We have to save our institutions from this attack so that the hard work of our ancestors does not go in vain. We, together, will save the legacy of the nation and take it to new heights. Jai Hind. On 26 November 1949, we were not only celebrating the feeling of independence, but also our newfound identity as a sovereign nation and the adoption of our constitution. But it was a long journey to reach this day, a journey of ideology, dreams and resolutions. Our ancestors were successful in this journey, but the biggest contribution to it was the Constitution of India.
We, the people of India, have solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, democratic republic and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, political, and equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give ourselves this Constitution.
The journey of the Indian Constitution began on the night of 31st December 1929 during the Lahore session of the Congress Party, where under the presidentship of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the resolution of Purna Swaraj was adopted on 26 January 1930. Later, the demand for a Constituent Assembly was raised in 1934, and due to heavy pressure from the Congress, the British rulers accepted the demand for its formation in 1940. Finally, the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly was held on 9th December 1946, in which members of all ideologies gathered together in harmony. However, this journey doesn't end here. The journey of the Constitution continues, for the role of Baba Saheb is still to come. Jai Hind.
Any discussion on the Constitution would be incomplete without mentioning Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar. Ambedkar began his life amid very difficult conditions, the seeds for which were sown by the British rulers for the past 2 centuries. The young Ambedkar struggled in those circumstances and proved himself. He received an education from esteemed institutes, right from the famous Elphinstone College of Mumbai to Columbia University and London School of Economics. Let's turn back to the Constitution. On 29 August 1947, an important turning point came. The drafting committee was formed and Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar was heading it. Various committees formed in the Constituent Assembly had eminent members like Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Gopinath Bardoloi, Pattabi Sitaramayya and Krishnaswamy Iyer. But the most important task in framing the Constitution was of the drafting committee, which was handled deftly by Baba Saheb. Underlining the importance of the Congress Party, Baba Saheb in his concluding speech said, "The presence of the Congress in the Constituent Assembly made sure that there was no chaos, which ensured systematic and disciplined working. This was due to the discipline of the Congress that the drafting committee could present each clause and amendment remaining assured of its predicament. Therefore, the credit of the smooth passage of the draft of the Constitution goes to the Congress. At the same time, Baba Sahib also cautioned against the challenges of the future and said, "No matter how good a constitution is, it can prove bad if its followers are bad people." Today, Baba Sahib's apprehensions are proving true. Our constitution is being attacked. It is being sabotaged. The people's voice is being crushed. And so it is our responsibility to save the legacy of our constitution from bad intentions. This will be a true homage to Baba Sahib. Jai Hind. Azadi is a beautiful word, but this word would be incomplete without our constitution, and the constitution would be incomplete without the participation of our people. The Congress party took along people and led the freedom movement. Therefore, it had the big responsibility of ensuring that the constitution involved all ideologies and regions in order to make our independence a success. Congress may have been the most powerful entity, but it ensured that there was equal representation in the Constituent Assembly, and as Dr. Ambedkar said, it also ensured discipline in the Assembly. Today, we might feel that it was easy to frame our Constitution, but we have to understand the horrifying difficulties of society, caste, class, religion, region, along with the divisive forces of the British that our ancestors had to face. The framers took along 12 provinces, 29 princely states, and 299 members who sat through 11 sessions in 165 days, involving 7,635 amendments with multiple articles, and were finally able to prepare this document in 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. This document not only laid the foundation of the future of India, but also proved those global powers wrong who had predicted India's doom after independence. The difficulties faced during the framing of the Constitution can be understood in the words of Dr. Ambedkar. This assembly can congratulate itself for completing this arduous task in such a short period. Actually, the framing of the Constitution was the beginning of a new era. This era had a strategy and an exchange of ideas, which is extremely important to understand today. The exchange of these ideas is known as debate in the Constituent Assembly, which was essential in preparing the legacy of modern India. If we don't understand these discussions, we will never understand ourselves. Jai Hind.
The Constitution is that document which fills us with a sense of security. It is that document that ensures we enjoy all our rights. Our ancestors worked relentlessly, day in and day out, held innumerable discussions to prepare a document which would secure India from any power around the world conspiring to rule over it. And they succeeded at doing so. But the journey of preparing the Constitution was not that easy. This effort by our ancestors and the procedure followed in framing our Constitution are considered a benchmark across the world even today. Every thought, every religion, every region, every language, every party was represented in the process, and this is what made our Constitution unmatched. The process involved freedom of thought, which gave birth to debates, discussions, and mutual consultations, making our Constitution unparalleled. During the 165 days, 46 days went into primary deliberations, while 101 days were spent on deliberations related to how the Constitution must be drafted. Of these 101 days, 16 days were spent on debating and discussing the fundamental rights, which today gives us the status of being an Indian citizen and strengthens our citizenry. 6 days were spent on debating and discussing the directive principles, which now leads us on the path of being a civilized society. 3 days were spent discussing citizenship. In this round of debate and discussion, a total of 36 lakh words were exchanged, out of which 2/3, that is 24 lakh words, were for discussions on the articles of the Constitution. In actuality, our Constitution is a document prepared with freedom of thought and acceptance at the root of it. A document which protects the poor who live on the footpaths and the affluent who live in palatial houses equally, even during the most difficult circumstances. Our ancestors contributed immensely to the preparation of this legacy, our Constitution, and we will learn more about it soon. Jai Hind. It is certain that if the parties place creed above the country, our independence will be put in jeopardy a second time and probably be lost forever. These were the words of Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar, chairman of the drafting committee, during a debate on the Constitution. Baba Saheb probably knew that placing a party above the country and an individual above a party would result in dictatorship. Not only this, Baba Saheb may also have predicted the challenges of the coming times, when in the Constituent Assembly he said, "Who can say how the people of India and their political parties will behave? In addition to our old enemies in the form of castes and creeds, we are going to have many political parties with diverse and opposing political creeds." These words by Baba Saheb during the debate pointed to the evils that manifest out of caste and religion, evils we need to stay away from. In fact, the synchronization and openness shown by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar as the chairman of the drafting committee is commendable. In his concluding speech, focusing on decentralization and the power of the people, Baba Saheb said, "The Constitution can provide only the organs of the state, such as the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The factors on which the working of those organs of the state depends are the people and the political parties they will set up as their instruments to carry out their wishes as their politics." What we need to gauge today is whether the political party currently in power is fulfilling the aspirations of the people, or by attacking the Constitution, by destabilizing elected governments, by imposing decisions without discussions in Parliament, it is turning Baba Saheb's concerns into reality. It is our responsibility to think clearly and keep the spirit of Baba Saheb's words in the Constituent Assembly. We must be determined to defend our independence with the last drop of our blood alive. It is our responsibility to protect the freedom our ancestors sacrificed for. Jai Hind.